Hey guys, today I'm going to show you how to create a dramatic outdoor portrait image in Photoshop. Hi guys, Ben Taylor here and welcome to PS Tutorials, where you learn Photoshop the easy way. Now, usually I bring tutorials out on a Wednesday and a Monday, but this week it's a Thursday, and that's because I had an operation, which this is the reason why my voice sounds really crazy at the moment and not very easy to understand. So I apologize to everyone for the really bad audio, but everything I'm sure will be back to normal next week. So today's tutorial is all about creating a dramatic outdoor portrait image in Photoshop, and I'm going to take you through a step-by-step process of how to achieve this. So let's jump in and start by creating a duplicate layer. You can do this by pressing Ctrl or Command J on your keyboard. Now, in today's tutorial, you know that we're going to be creating this dramatic portrait image, but there's a certain look we're going to go for and a certain process we're going to take. So to kick things off, what I want to do first is create a selection of this woman, and that's so I can create a blur in the background without blurring her out as well, because that would look, wow, bloody awful. So the first thing I want to do is to go over to my quick selection tool. Like the name implies, it enables us to create quick selections. Now this tool is, well, it's a really fantastic tool, but it has two things which I use mainly. I use the plus brush and also the minus brush. So I'm just going to increase the size of the brush here, and you can see in the middle there is a plus sign. If I click and drag over the woman like this, it's adding to my selection. If I click on the minus sign at the top here and then I start clicking over the selection, it's then subtracting from the selection. So this is really great, guys. What I can do is I can add and create a selection, or alternatively I can then use the minus and then subtract this from the selection. So I want to create a selection, so let's make sure I am on the plus here at the top, and then I'm going to start clicking and dragging over the woman. You're going to see that Photoshop's doing a really fantastic job, but it's going to have some difficulty when we come down to this little bit here at the bottom where we've got some wheat or some kind of plant, whatever it is, that's kind of over our arm. Now, like I just showed you, it also has the option to subtract from the selection. So this is where we can now use the subtract. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press Alt on my keyboard, which is a shortcut for selecting the minus brush. Alternatively, I could come back up to the top and then click on it here. And then this area here, where it's kind of gone over a little bit, I can now just start clicking and then dragging it in, and it's subtracting from the selection. I really love this tool. It does make creating selections in Photoshop super easy. Now, anytime that you're subtracting and then you come across a little part where you think, oh, like this part down here where I need to add back to it, just simply come, change it over to the plus brush, and then just add it back in. And it's that simple. Now it's just grabbing my space bar here and then moving around. If you don't know how to do that, by the way, you can just hold your space bar down and then click and drag around, and this enables you to move around the image. It's basically seeing what you're doing a bit more clearly. Okay, now we don't have to worry about getting the selection perfect, because we're going to then go on to select a mask in a minute, and this will enable us to refine the edge. So that's looking pretty good there. So let's go ahead now and then click on our select a mask, which can be found at the top here. Let's click on that, and then you're going to have a dialog box which opens up in front of you. Now, I like to use a red background to refine my edge because it enables me to see easier and clearer. But you might not have this showing, so simply come up to the view area here at the top and then click on the drop down, and you can see there's quite a few selections. Now for me, red works really good, like overlay, so just click that and then you'll have the red appear. Okay, so I just now want to make sure that I have this brush selected up here, which is the Refine Edge brush tool. It does what it says, it refines the edge which we want to do. So all you have to do is simply click and then drag around on your edge, and then Photoshop uses amazing technology, and then it's able to decide what's the edge of your subject and what's not. And you know what? 9 times out of 10 it does a really amazing job. So whenever you want to refine that edge, guys, use the refine edge brush because it really does a great job. So I'm going to make sure I click and drag around this bit of wheat here. I still don't know what it is. I think it's wheat. And then that's going to refine the edge if you have a look. And it should do a really good job. There you go. Perfect. So now I'm just going to use the spacebar again, drag the image down, and let's just have a look if there's anywhere else I want to cover over the edge with. No, that's looking great. So now I want to output this selection. If I click the drop down here, we've got a few different things I can choose from, but I want to output the selection to a new layer with a layer mask and then click OK. And this is because I now have this here, this layer with a layer mask of the woman at the top, and then I've got the background on a separate layer. Now granted, yes, the background has still got the woman on, so no matter what layer I use it on here, I'm still going to be putting a blur on the background, which I don't want. Now I've created this selection, I can then use this selection here. By pressing Control, you can activate the selection. Then I'm going to click on this layer below, click on the eye to make it visible. And now I can remove the selection from this layer. So I've just got the wheat, which is what we want, just the wheat. So to do that, I need to come up to the top and then I need to click on Select and then come down to Modify and then across to Expand. I want to expand it by around about 20 pixels, so I'm going to click OK. Now what this is going to do is it's going to expand the selection like that. You see how there's expanded it, and it's going to tell Photoshop exactly what area I want to cover this with. Now it's great that Photoshop can kind of judge this itself. Now to do the next step of this, I need to fill this area in where the woman is. So click on Edit, come down to Fill, and then go across here. Make sure you're on Content Aware, and then click OK. Now with OK clicked, Photoshop is going to replace this area and fill it with what it deems as the right thing or the right area. So to see this, let's just click the top layer off here, and there you go. Photoshop's done an amazing job. I'm going to press Control and D, and that's going to get rid of the selection. Now, if you do this on your image and it doesn't look great, and there's still some areas which need changing, all you need to do is you need to use this tool here called the Spot Healing Brush tool, and all you have to do is paint over some areas which don't look very good. Now for me the image looks amazing, but there's just this bit here which is not connecting to anything. So you just simply paint over it with a spot healing brush and bingo, it's gone. So now I've got my background layer with just the wheat on, and I've also got my layer above here with the woman on. So I can now make this blur happen to the background layer without blurring the woman at the same time and making her look all kinds of crazy. So we have both layers. We have the one layer, layer 1, with just the background, and we also have the other layer with just the woman on. Now let's add the blur. Come up to Filter, down to Blur Gallery, and then we've got a few options here. But we want to choose Tilt Shift. So I'm going to click on that there. Now you've got these lines which have appeared in front of you. You may be thinking, you know, what the heck do these lines do? I'm going to tell you. So you can add a blur to 2 parts of the image. You can add a blur to the top, and you can add a blur to the bottom. You can see the blur at the bottom, especially at the moment. But by moving these lines around, it gives you the power to actually add more blur in or less blur to these 2 different areas. Now I don't want the blur at the bottom, so I'm going to click this line and then drag it down. I'm also going to click the line above it and drag that down, and then you should start seeing the blur vanish. And you do, there it goes. I only want to add the blur to the top bit behind her head, and this is because that's showing far away, and that's where the blur should be naturally in the photograph. So just by moving these two lines around, you can see I'm kind of making the blur only visible in the background area towards the back of her head. Now, the blur's not much at the moment, so if I come up to this slider here and then push it up, you can see how I'm starting to add more of the blur into the background. And this is good because it's what I want to do. I want to add more of a blur in. Now that's pretty good round about there for the amount of blur, but I just want to drag it down. So I'm dragging this line down so it affects a little bit lower. And I'd say around about there is looking pretty good. Just maybe see if I can drag it down a bit more. The answer to that is no. Okay, so we've got an option here on the right hand side called light bokeh. I'm going to push this up and look what happens. So I'm pushing up the slider now, and then watch the top of the image. It starts adding in this really cool light effect at the top of the image. And I'm actually going to use this in today's image. Now at the bottom there's a slider which says light range. Now what I can do with this is I can push this slider up here and then watch what happens. It totally ruins the image. Now basically this enables you to push more light in to the image than originally you can with the light bokeh. But to be honest with you, I think a small amount of light's good, and I don't think it needs any extra. So I'm going to leave it around about there. It's a tricky little slider this, it keeps moving. Let's bring it up again, and there, I'm going to leave it there. You also have the option to use something called bokeh color, which is just above here. Now watch, I'm going to push this slider up, and generally it doesn't look particularly good, not for this image anyway, so I'm not going to add any into this image. So this is great guys, we've now created this awesome blur and then this really cool light effect. So let's click OK. And then this should add it to our image. Might take a bit of time to load. There you go, it's added it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to group these two layers together. And to do that is really simple. If you've never done this before, you just need to shift and click on the layer above with your lower layer here highlighted. So shift click on that now, and then press Control or Command if you're on the Mac and G, and then this is going to group them together. I now want to duplicate these, so press Control or Command J, and then finally I'm going to merge these two layers together in the top group. And to do that, all you have to do is right click on your group, and then it's going to bring up some options. Just go on to Merge Group, and this is so I've got both layers now merged together because I'm going to be working on them together rather than separate going forward. If you're enjoying this tutorial guys, this is actually all about retouching, it's outdoor retouching. I've created a full complete course which you can see up in the screen somewhere now, and this takes you from start to finish in the beauty and portrait retouching process. The great thing about this course is it's all of the techniques you'll learn in it are actually all the professional industry standards which have enabled people to get out there in front of expensive clients and also in magazines such as Vogue. So, grab a copy of this if you're interested in retouching, because it actually helps fund me to do what I love doing, which is providing these helpful tutorials for you guys. Back to today's tutorial anyway. So what I'm going to do in the next step of this image is click on Filter, and then I'm going to click on Camera Raw Filter. Now this is something that people use generally at the start of the image process, but what I'm going to do in this tutorial is show you how you can use it at any point, and it's a really powerful tool because it's got all these options on the right hand side, like this exposure here. If I drag this down, it's lowering the exposure, and it's got a whole list of them. So I'm going to lower the exposure in this image, and I'm going to push the contrast up a little bit, and it gives it a bit more a dramatic effect. Then with the rest of the sliders, I'm just going to push the highlights up slightly so there's a bit more light in the sky and the face. And then you just continue to go through each one of these options. I'm going to push a little bit of whites into the image, but nothing major, because it can change the effect of your skin tone. And then I'm going to push the clarity up, not that much though. I'm going to push it up quite a bit, and this kind of adds a detail to the picture, so it makes things stand out a bit more, a bit similar to sharpen really. And then finally I'm going to push up the vibrancy, and this is going to increase the vibrancy of the color in your image, and this is going to make things look a bit more colorful. So you can see how many changes super quickly and easily we're able to make with this camera raw filter. And now I'm going to click OK. So remember guys, camera raw filter is good and you can use it at any process or any time throughout the retouching process. So now I've added that to my picture, you can see the before where it's a bit of a flat image, and you can see the after with the blur, the cool light effect, and the simple changes made in the camera raw filter. Now this image is really starting to take shape now. So the next step in retouching this outdoor portrait image is to color tone it. Now there is 1,000,001 different ways to do this in Photoshop, but I like to use color balance. The great thing about color balance is you can change the shadows, midtones and highlights. I'm going to start by changing the shadows. Now I want to add more cyan and like a yellow effect to the shadows. At the moment it's all very red. So to do that, all I need to do is move my sliders around. So this says cyan, that's simple. And then I'm just going to push more cyan into the image. And then I'm going to push a bit more magenta in. And this is affecting the shadows. Now, of course, if you are on something like highlights, it wouldn't be affecting the shadows, would it? So just make sure you're on the one that you need, which is shadows, midtones or highlights. And then you can move these sliders around really simply and make a change. So I've added cyan, a bit of magenta and a bit of yellow. Now I'm going to use the mid-tone sliders. I'm going to push a bit more cyan in again. Now it's important for me to note at this point, you don't have to follow what I'm doing with the color toning here. This is all down to personal preference, so don't start writing down the exact amounts which I've put in, because you really don't need to do that. Remember, Photoshop is all about being creative, experimenting and just expressing yourself. You know, just have fun with it, guys. Don't, you know, do things exact. It just happened that for this image I wanted to choose, you know, color tone which was a bit more on the cyans and the yellows. So with the highlights I'm going to add actually a bit more into the reds, I think. So I'm just going to push up the red slider and then a bit into the yellows. And if you don't know this, red and yellow makes orange. So I'm adding a bit more of an orange effect into the highlights. I'm also going to, I think I'm just going to add a tiny bit of magenta in. And I quite like the way that's looking. It's give it that nice cyan cinematic color tone effect, which is actually quite common now. So I'm just going to push a bit more cyan into the shadows. If you're enjoying this tutorial so far, guys, I'd love you to hit away on that like button, or alternatively, leave me a comment, because I love to hear how useful you found this tutorial for one, and then two, what you're actually going to do with what you've learned in this tutorial. And it really means a lot to me to hear from you guys, so, you know, leave me a comment if you can. Right, back into today's tutorial, I'm going to create another layer by pressing Control, Shift and N, or Command, Shift and N if you're on the Mac. And then I'm going to press Control, Shift, Alt and E. I'll say that again, Control, Shift, Alt and E. And that creates a stamp visible layer. Let's show you what I mean. I'll grab the Move tool here, and basically it creates a visible layer of everything we've done so far on it. And this enables me now to start making changes from this point onwards. So if I go up to Filter and then back down to Camera Raw Filter, we're now going to use this to draw more attention to the subject, because that's where we want people viewing the image, that we want their eyes drawn to her. So how do we do that? Well, I'm going to use this tool up here called the ellipse tool. And all we need to do is basically drag an ellipse around our subject. This is going to affect everything outside of the image. So effectively, you can see that the middle is brighter and the outside is darker. And this is automatically drawing your eyes towards the woman in this picture more. This is like a little trick that is used a lot in outdoor and also portrait retouching. So if I drag down the exposure here, you can see I'm darkening the outside around the woman, and this is drawing your eye towards the woman more. I'm not going to make many other changes because all I really wanted to do was just to create that effect that your eye is being drawn towards her more. Now there's an option at the bottom called feather. This is going to enable us to feather the amount of blending between the light and the dark. It may sound a bit confusing. Let's show you what I mean. Let's come down to the bottom now, and then let's grab the slider under feather. And if I bring this all the way down, you can see we've just essentially got a solid line between the dark and the light. Now, if I push the feather slider up, you can see that it's starting to blend the background and the foreground together. So it's not like a harsh transition. So as soon as you've got the feather slider where you want it, about there is good, I'm going to click OK. And now we have our image, which is actually being transformed just by that little change we've made in the camera raw filter. I really like the way this image is starting to kind of transform now. But I think it's a little bit dark, so let's brighten the image up a little bit. I'm going to click on adjustments and then go to the exposure adjustment. Click on that here, and then all I'm going to do is move the exposure slider around until I've got a place where I'm comfortable in the image where it's got enough light. Okay, so we'll look at the before and the after. It's probably a bit too subtle, so I'm just going to push up the slider a little bit more, and about there's looking good. Okay, so I've got the lightness of the image correct now. The next step I want to take is I want to go ahead and I want to change the colour on our subject a little bit, because at the moment the light above her and the extra light on her is making her stand out. To do that, I'm going to click on adjustments and then click on curves. If you never used curves before, you should use it more because it's a great tool. You have these four options here. And curves allows us to add more light or dark into the colours. So I click on RGB, that's red, green and blue. I can push up the line and this adds more light into all of the colours. But what I want to do is I want to choose the colours individually that I want to add more light or dark into. So I want to create an orange colour in the subject. To do that, I'm going to push up my red in the middle, which is my midtones, a little bit. You see I'm adding red in. If you remember from earlier, I told you that red and yellow makes orange. So the opposite of yellow is blue. So if I drag the blue down, I'm going to be adding effectively yellow into the image. Now I've got my orange colour, that's great, but I don't want it affecting the whole image. I want this to only affect the woman. To do this, I need to press Ctrl or Command I on this layer. And what this is going to do is it's going to hide the effect that we've made, and then I'm going to be able to paint this effect back in only where I want it visible. So I've got my brush tool selected for painting. I want to make sure I'm on white and make sure the flow is on about 10%. Now I'm simply going to paint over my black mask, revealing this colour on the woman. Super simple to do. Now I want this to be a subtle change, so let's have a look at the before and the after. You can see it's only a subtle difference, and just paint a little bit more back in. This is just another way of making our subjects stand out more than the background. So I think you'll agree with me on this. We've actually done a lot of different things to this image so far, but each one of them has been easy to do. There's been nothing too complex. And maybe if you found something complex, then it's probably worth you just rewinding in the tutorial, going back to it, and then kind of going over it again. But hopefully I've been able to make most of it as simple to understand as possible. The next few steps we're going to take, let's start with the first one. I'm going to add a bit more red back into the image. I can do that by choosing my adjustment and then choosing my colour balance. Now, if you remember from earlier, this is such an easy tool to add different colours into your highlights, midtones and your shadows. So all we're going to do is do that again. So I'm going to click my red slider and then drag it up to push a bit more into my shadows. And then when I've got that where I want it, I'm then going to go next onto my midtones and then do the same. So click here on your midtones and then just push the slider up to introduce red. And then finally on the highlights. When I've added the red in and I'm happy where it's kind of gone or it's going with the colour, then what I'm going to do is actually add more light into the subject, because she stands out but she doesn't stand out a lot. To do that, I've clicked on a curves adjustment layer and I'm just going to drag slider up in the middle like we did before. Make sure you're in RGB so you're lightening all the colours. I've darkened my mask, so I've hid this by pressing Ctrl or Command I, and now I'm just painting over this just to reveal a bit of light. Remember, you want this effect to be subtle, you don't want it to be unrealistic, so it looks like there's a load of light all over her. And about there is looking great. Really happy with the way that looks. Okay, so the final step in this process is to sharpen the subject in the image. I bet you thought you were never going to get to the final process. Well, we're here and we're going to sharpen her. So how do we do that? Well, I know a way of sharpening which is great. It's a bit more complicated than the normal way, but it's the perfect way to sharpen a portrait image. How do we do that? Well, let's first go ahead and create a new layer by pressing Ctrl or Command Shift and N. Now let's create a stamp visible layer. Ctrl Shift Alt and E. That's that really tricky thing we did earlier. It's Ctrl Shift Alt and E. Now we want to create this black and white, so press Ctrl Shift and U. You're thinking, Ben, there's a lot of steps here. And then finally, let's click on a blend mode called Soft Light here. Now, as soon as you've done this a few times, it's going to stick in your mind and you won't be able to forget about it. The last step is to go into Filter, down to Other, and then click on High Pass. Now, finally, we have this slider here, which we can push up and down to add the amount of sharpening we want. I want this pretty low to start with. So I'm going to click it around about 4 to 5 and click OK. Now we don't want this effect in the whole image again. So I'm going to click down here on my mask button and press Alt at the same time, and that's going to give me a black mask. It's going to hide the effect. So I'm going to click on my brush again, make sure I'm on white, and then I'm going to paint this back into the image. So let's just start painting this back in. And this is going to reveal a sharpening effect just over my subject. Now the great thing about this effect, this complicated effect, is that you have complete control over how much sharpening you add or take away. So this little bit of sharpening has actually made all the difference. The accumulation of all these different things you've done to the subject has just made her pop out of the image. So one last thing I want to do here, I know I've said that before, but I just want to go onto adjustments, down to curves adjustment, and then just to add a little bit more brightness in. I know I'm a bit of a perfectionist sometimes, and actually that can really serve you in Photoshop. So just adding a tiny bit more light in, and around there is looking good. I'm just going to group these layers now together by shift clicking them, and then press Ctrl or Command G to group them. And that's it. we now have the finished picture. Let's have a look at the before and the after. This is so important. So this is the before. It's a nice image, but it's not great. It's washed out. This is the after. Wow, what a difference we've made, folks. We've created a dramatic outdoor portrait image in Photoshop. And though there may have been quite a few steps to get to this, they were all easy. And as long as you go through this and spend a little bit of time, these things will stick in your head and you'll be able to replicate these on your own images. Thanks for joining me today, guys, for this tutorial. I hope you've enjoyed it and found it unbelievably helpful and valuable. Remember to leave me some comments below because I'd love to hear from you. And if this is your first time here, why not subscribe? Because I have new videos every Monday and Thursday now for you to enjoy. Whatever you do today, guys, have a great day and I'll see you all soon.